This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, John Ryder back with episode 107 of A Geek Leader podcast, and today on the show we've got Mark Schwartz. He's the author of The Art of Business Value, A Seat at the Table, and War and Peace in IT. His books are all about how technology leaders need to have a stake in the business and making business decisions and driving the business forward, and not just be order takers, not just be, filling requirements, but actually working with the business as a part of a team and moving forward. We talk a lot about DevOps. We talk a lot about Agile. We talk about digital transformation, which is a process that I'm going through, that a lot of companies are going through today. And I've actually gifted his newest book, War and Peace in IT, to several people. I've purchased many paperback copies of it as well. We'll link that up in the show notes. We have a great conversation about all the things that you can do to help get a seat at the table as a business leader when you're in technology, and the reasons why technology needs to drive those decisions. So with all that being said, give it up for Mark Schwartz. All right, today on the show, we've got Mark Schwartz, and he wrote a couple of books, one that has been mentioned on the podcast before, Seat at the Table, and one that I'm diving into now, which is War and Peace in IT. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So if you don't mind telling the audience just a little bit about kind of your journey through technology, how you got involved in it, and kind of where that's taken you, just to give us some context about the conversation.
Sure. Well, actually, I should start here. When I was in high school, I was pretty sure I was going to become a doctor. That was the original plan. And so I volunteered to work in a hospital. And while I was doing that, it suddenly hit me that I didn't really like working with sick people. It was kind of gross, So I thought, well, probably I shouldn't be a doctor. And the next interest right after that was computer science. And I followed that through college, got a major in computer science, and became a software engineer, later a manager of software developers. At some point went to business school, especially at that point thinking that I was probably going to want to be in the startup community and I should know something about growing a company. And at some point wound up as CEO of a small software company, then later CIO of a company based in San Francisco. And then in a big step, I became CIO of a government agency, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. And that was a big organization. I'd never managed a really big IT organization like that. I had about 2,000 IT employees and a budget of about $600 million. And, there was a lot to learn about how to manage a big organization because it turned out to be somewhat different. And then after I left the government a few years ago, I joined Amazon Web Services, where I am an enterprise strategist.
Okay. So what was that like when you went from kind of a smaller company as a CIO to now all of a sudden you got a $600 million budget and 2,000 people kind of looking up to you? I'm sure that was kind of like a deer in the headlights look.
Yeah, a little bit. I certainly made some mistakes at the beginning. One of the obvious differences is that you don't know everybody who works for you. In a smaller company, you do, and you know quite a lot of the people around the rest of the business. But this was an organization that was, because it was the government, it was rather hierarchical, kind of a deep hierarchy. And there was no way that I was going to get to know everybody. So a lot of communication is indirect. You're asking for things or talking to people through various layers of middle management. And I discovered that sometimes the message, as it reached kind of the frontline people, the executors, it had changed and working its way down the hierarchy, sort of, the game of telephone, where the message changes a little bit every time somebody whispers it to somebody else. I had to learn mechanisms for dealing with that, for getting feedback and finding out how it had reached people, and for maybe correcting a little bit. I also found that in a very hierarchical organization like that, every word that I said was important, because since people didn't hear from me that often, they tended to sort of hang on every word. It was a big thing. And if I was loose in my speaking, if I wasn't careful, then what I said could have unintended consequences. So those were learnings for me early on. But the interesting challenge is if you got a big organization like that and it's moving in a certain direction, and you want to shift that direction, you need to have some kind of leverage. You can't go out and change every person individually. You have to find a way to make the change keep rolling on its own, keep snowballing. And I would say that my time in that position, in a way, was spent learning how to do that.
So when you have to make a change, like I'm imagining like a giant ship, like a cruise ship, with the company that big, you have to kind of plan that change out in advance. You can't just say, "Oh, let's just take a left here." What kind of communication has to go forth with the other departments and the other groups that you are kind of peers with in order to make a change like that?
Yeah. So what I found was you don't really plan it so much. It's that's maybe the wrong way to think about it. Mm-hmm. And I'll come back to your question in a second, but I think what I probably did, looking back on it, was to set a very high level vision that everybody could understand. And in my case, it was something like, we're going to take this big IT organization and we're going to make it extremely responsive. We're going to have a very short cycle time. We're going to speed things up quite a lot, and that was the plan. That was the extent to which it was a plan, and it was a very sort of firm guiding vision. Everybody understood that was the direction that we were going. But then the trick to making it scale out is to let the rest of the organization figure out exactly how to do that, to engage everybody and everybody's creativity. And so we started with sort of a big picture vision, but then the execution was in small, quick steps, and driven by everybody's creativity and trying to find ways to speed things up. So that was more what the transformation looked like. And in terms of how to bring peers on board, let me give you an example of kind of an exaggeration of what it sounded like when I spoke to my peers. Okay. I think that's the best way to explain this. So I would go to a part of the business organization that didn't get a lot of attention from IT because they were small and had a limited budget. And I would say something like, how we don't do a lot of work on your projects? Well, is it okay if we focus on some of your needs now? And the answer would be, yeah, that sounds okay. And then I would say, obviously, this is not literally what happened, but I would say, and you know how it usually takes us like 2 years to produce any results when we start a big project. Is it okay if we start actually giving you the things you want in about 2 weeks instead? Yeah, I guess that's okay too. And how about this? You know how usually you write a big requirements document and give it to the IT people, and then they turn over something later on that isn't really what you wanted. How about if instead of that, we have my IT people are working directly with your people, and your people are guiding what they produce? Is that okay? Yeah, I guess that would be okay. Well, great news. I've got this thing, this new IT transformational thing that we can use that's going to do exactly that. And let's meet again in 2 weeks so I can start to show you the results. Right? That's not a hard sell.
Yeah.
At least, when it works out that neatly.
So, yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this because I know, like, I've at my last company that I worked with, we were very waterfall oriented, where we had project charters for everything, and we went through the whole process of
Mm-hmm.
very very strict, and we made the shift to agile, specifically Scrum. And we did it with one group, and it just happened to be my group was one of the first ones where I was the manager of the web and mobile development teams, and when we rolled it out, we had a lot of distrust from the business, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
of wanting
Yeah.
to work with us. And we had some managers that would say, well, my people don't have enough time. They don't have time to work with you guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you move the needle forward when you get that pushback?
Yeah. I think I think of it as trusting your process, right? I was using a DevOps sort of process where we were constantly deploying results to production. So in your Scrum way of doing things, perhaps you had like 2 week sprints, and at the end of 2 weeks, you do a demo, and then you'd actually release code to production for people to use occasionally, right? Every couple of months or something. But DevOps approach is rather different. You're developing and deploying immediately, and you can achieve a phenomenal velocity. You can be deploying many times a day. So because of that, I knew that I could show results very, very quickly, even if they were small results. And I could use that as a way to build trust with the stakeholders in other parts of the business. So instead of saying, well, we're going to do this agile thing, and you'll start to, you'll see demos now and you won't get results for a while, I could say, well, don't trust me, trust me for one day and I'll show you. And then after a day, start having some results. And that was great at building trust.
So when it comes to a DevOps approach versus like a Scrum approach or some other agile approach, what is the role of the business? Like getting them involved and having them, work with IT, being part of the team. How much time, consumption is it for them? Because sometimes that's a tough sell to say, hey, I need to meet with your team on a daily basis, even if it is just for a stand up or something short like that. Well, what is that sell like for the business folks that are coming in, or the operations team? They're going to be part of this DevOps team.
Yeah. I found it to be a little bit of a challenge when I was trying to use a Scrum process, asking for a product owner who was going to be dedicated and for a lot of the users to be involved continuously. But I started to think about it rather differently as we moved into the DevOps world, where first of all, I don't like the distinction between IT and the business, right? As far as I'm concerned, IT is the business. It's part of the business. Everybody's part of the business. It's not like a separate thing. And what I tried to do, and it's not like I figured this all out early on, it took a while to evolve this way of working. But what I tried to do is to make a group of people responsible for getting the results. And those people were both business people and IT people. And they were going to work together to accomplish the outcomes that were important to the agency in this case. And so, in a way, there was no choice for my business peers. The idea was that there was something that they needed or wanted to accomplish. And since they wanted to accomplish, they were going to commit some people to work on it instead of tossing it over the wall to an IT organization and then saying, well, now that we've tossed it over the wall, we don't have time for you anymore. In this case, they were actually actively involved in every aspect of accomplishing whatever the objective was. So it was like a cross-functional team that went across the business operating people and the technologists. And I maintain that if it's something that's really important to that part of the business, then they will find a way, or they'll have to find a way to commit the effort to it. And if they can't, then it's probably not a high priority, and we should be working on something for a different part of the business.
Yeah, cool. So some of our listeners I know are managers of IT teams and maybe on the infrastructure and help desk teams and things like that. How do they shift the mindset of their company from IT as just being order takers or ticket workers to being someone who is an integral part of making business decisions and moving the ball forward in the company?
Yeah, that is the big question: how to accomplish that transformation.
Mm-hmm.
I Well, in my case, I was sort of driving it from the top, from from a senior executive position. And when you are driving it from the top, I think there's an approach that works pretty well, which is to reset people's goals. The goal of the approach I just described before is a business goal. There's a particular business outcome we're looking for. So, to choose an example, our case processors can do 70 cases a day now using the IT system that they have, but we want them to be able to do more cases than that every day. So there's a business goal. And then the idea is to align the IT organization and the non-IT business people behind accomplishing that goal. So it's not about changing the role of IT. It's not about big change. It's about we're going to put together a group of people to accomplish a goal and change their incentive to be accomplishing that goal. So, team, you don't have to write code if that's not the best way to accomplish the goal. If the best way to accomplish the goal is just to change business process, then do that and do whatever it takes. And then they start thinking differently about it. They see success as being success in accomplishing whatever the business need is, rather than in writing code or setting up infrastructure or something like that. And so that's the way the transformation looks, I think, if you're pushing it from the top of the org chart. If you're pushing it from the middle or a bottom-up sort of approach, I think it's a little bit different. If you're pushing the change from towards the middle of a very vertical org chart like the one that I was part of, or from the ground up as a technologist, as a hands-on technologist, I think what you're trying to do is show wins as quickly as possible. To have results that impress people. And as people see success happening, they want to be part of it. And, there's they're the cool kids on the block who are using DevOps, and that's the cool thing. And I want to be part of that also. And that helps change people's minds when they see a model for what it looks like and they see that it's working. Those are a couple of ideas, but I think this is one of those topics we could talk about forever.
Yeah. I know the company that I'm at at my full-time job, we're working through a program right now called, we actually titled it Digital Transformation Initiative. And, working with the business to pull IT and technology in as being the driver for a lot of these decisions and being an integral part of these decisions, and not just being the group that implements, the software or whatever, and builds it. We're going to be part of, helping define some of these workflows and some of these processes that we go through. And we found that, people that have seen some of the results quickly, really jump on board and are really excited about it. But then there's other groups that we haven't gotten to yet, or their workflows may be on the fringes. And we found that it's difficult to bring them on board when they're feeling like they're left out. Is there a way that when you have very limited staff, a limited budget, how can you get those people involved as well sometimes?
Yeah. One thing that works really well so essentially the problem is that you need to spread good practices and spread the culture that you're looking for. You already have some teams that are good at it, that are have the right skills and have adopted the new way of thinking. Usually with technologists, the best way for them to catch up or absorb those learnings is through some sort of a pairing arrangement, where they're actually working alongside the people who have already adopted the new practices. So I've seen a couple of different models for how you can set that up. One is called the dojo model, where you have a team that is the experts on the new practices, and then you rotate other teams in to work alongside that team for a brief period, and then they go back to where they were, and you rotate another team in. And by working alongside the people who are already good at it, the other team starts to not only absorb the practices, but also starts feeling like it's just a normal way to do things. You know, the people I'm working with do it that way, and it works. So the dojo model is one approach. There's what we call the mitosis model, where you have your one team, let's say of 8 people, that's really good at the new practices. So you split it into 2 teams of 4 people, and then you have 4 more people join each of those teams. And so you've seeded each team with people who have the practices that you want. And then once those 2 teams are really good, then you split those teams, and you just keep splitting teams and bringing in new people. So we've seen that model. And then there are models where you just literally pair, let's say, software developers. It's kind of the pair programming thing that extreme programming introduced. And you have a developer who's experienced in the new practices working directly with a developer who's not. And they transfer practices that way. And then you switch and have them pair with other people. And you just keep switching around so that good practices make their way through the organization.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I really like that mitosis model where you're kind of splitting the teams, because that way you have people that are, you know, they're able to bring like a different perspective into the new problem that they're trying to solve from the team that they just left.
Yeah. And I think the critical thing that makes this work is that it's not just about new practices. It's about people coming to think that it's just normal to use those practices. You know, there's a lot of fear until people start doing something. And this is a way of overcoming that fear by putting them in an environment where everybody's already doing it and it works just fine, and there's nothing to be afraid of.
So do you start the process inside, like with your own applications first before you move it out to other groups and other teams, or, you know, in order to alleviate some of that fear?
What do you mean with your...
So let's say we have an application that's just used by the technology departments. Would we work on that first so that we have a model that works, and we've shown that this process works when we decide to branch out and start working on things that are for a different team or different group or across multiple departments and divisions? That's
an interesting question. I guess I would say I haven't really tried it that way. So who knows? Somebody else should try it. But my inclination is to always be solving important business problems. You know, so whatever the priority thing is to get done, that's what you should have people working on, and they should be working towards an outcome, and it'll be more motivational that way. I guess my strategy usually is to be bold with these things, you know, because that way everybody gets the vision, feels like they're part of a change. And I think it sends maybe the wrong message if you say, well, first let's have people work on something that's not so important to us. And in a way you're saying, well, I don't really have confidence in what I'm doing. And I don't think that really helps the transformation. So that would be my gut feel. But I think experiments are important. Somebody should try it.
Yeah, I've been kind of a part of both. I know at my last company, the CIO was very big about what he used the phrase of, we got to eat our own dog food, which kind of meant that if we want to, you know, bring in other departments to do this, we need to do it across teams in our department first.
Yes.
And he always wanted to try that approach, and that worked well. And I do agree with you. You have to do it on a critical system, you know, in order to have that confidence. And it was more like, oh, your whole team's going to do this for everything that you do. So it is important and it is big. It's not like we're going to, you know, try it on one application that very few people use. We're going to do it on something big.
Right. Yeah. So I think that approach also helps convey confidence and commitment, you know, so it seems like a good idea to me.
Okay, cool. So what are some of the pitfalls that people fall into when they are undergoing a digital transformation or some kind of new um, process change that, they're bringing in other departments and other divisions and other leaders to go through? What are some of the things that we can avoid and look out for?
One thing I see a lot is people sometimes rightly say our culture isn't adapted to this way of working, right? We need to change our culture. But the mistake that they sometimes make is to think, well, changing our culture is a precondition to transforming. First we have to change the culture, and then we can do the transformation. But I found that doesn't really work because you can't just change a culture. Cultural change is sort of the output of doing a transformation. As you transform, the culture changes. So I think that's an easy mistake to make. Another one is to not to start doing practices without at the same time changing how you evaluate success. So typically in the waterfall world, you evaluate success based on did you hit the milestones in a Gantt chart. And when you move towards the DevOps approach that I'm talking about, where you're working against a business objective, not against a plan, if you then try to measure your success the same way with a Gantt chart and did you hit the milestones, then everybody's going to be confused, right? There's kind of no way to do it. You need to measure success based on accomplishing the business outcome. If we started with employees being able to process 70 cases a day and we wanted the number to be higher, then the way you measure success is by seeing whether the number is higher. And every day, every week, every couple of weeks, you check the number. And if it's going up, that means you're being successful. But a lot of organizations try to hold on to the old ways of measuring results, and that stops them dead in the transformation and causes a lot of bad feeling because you're telling people to act one way and then you're assessing them based on a completely different way. So I think those are that's what I see. And then maybe the other thing I alluded to before, which is not having the confidence in the results. Sometimes people who are pushing the transformation are afraid that they're not going to be able to meet the expectations of the rest of the organization and take steps to sort of hedge their risk around it. Where what they should be doing is saying, we're gonna start getting results right away because we're doing this transformation because it leads to better results. So if we're going to get results, then what's the problem? We're going to be able to show people that this is working and continue to build confidence. So it's important to commit and have some confidence in the results that you're going to get.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that you talk about in your book a lot is data, having data to, and you mentioned it here, measuring what you want to change and keeping that data, using those analytics to figure out whether you're being successful or not, and generating hypotheses and then testing those hypotheses and seeing if this is the route you want to go to. What are some ways that you've seen people, test their transformation process along the way?
Mm-hmm. I think what's increasingly happening as the basis for it's almost what replaces requirements is saying we think we should do such and such because it'll have the business impact that we want it to, but it's a hypothesis. We think this is right, but it could be wrong. And in the old school way of thinking about it, you would go and do it anyway. You'd write it into a requirements document, and then somebody would go implement it. And that's kind of risky if you think about it. You're proceeding with a requirement that you think is going to have the effect that you want, but there's no way to be sure about it, and you fully commit resources to it. So what we've discovered as an IT community is that you can actually test hypotheses before you've fully committed to them, thereby lowering your risk. So the idea would be, as you start to conceive of what you would have called requirements before, you say to yourself, well, what's the quickest, cheapest, simplest way I could check to make sure that this requirement is really going to have the impact that I think it's going to. And if it doesn't, then you change your idea, right? You adapt and you tweak the idea a little bit.
You know what? When I was reading this in your book and hearing about it, I'm a science nerd. I love I love science. I kept saying this is the scientific method. Why being the fact that I've got a master's in computer science, why have I not heard someone apply the scientific method to computer science?
And I think you are hearing it more and more. I think that's the lesson a lot of us took away from Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup, for example. You have a hypothesis about what product you can create that's going to add value for people, and you have a hypothesis about how you're going to get them to adopt your new product. And neither of those is certain. So you make the minimum viable product you can make that will test your hypotheses. And so you try something on customers and you see if they respond to it. Is it really creating value for them? And that way you're managing your risks and you're getting product to market quicker. So I think the same thing applies to IT going on inside the organization. And I can give you an example of where we didn't do it, and it turned out to be a good mistake. A good mistake in the sense that we learned a lot from it. When we were introducing a new electronic system for our adjudicators who process the immigration applications, we had an IT system that they used when they were processing the applications. And we thought that if we could fully automate the process, if we could do everything electronically, then we could speed up their adjudication process. That seemed logical. And so our contractor did a bunch of user research and spec'd out what the process might look like once it was fully electronic. And then the development teams built that process. And we found that what used to take the adjudicators 15 minutes to do was now taking them an hour and a quarter. It was unbelievable. The whole plan was to speed things up, and instead it slowed things way down. And when I finally sat down and watched the way the adjudicators were using this, I saw that, for example, they were scrolling through huge documents and it was slow for them to find things. And that sometimes they would look at one screen and write down on a little sticky note what they saw on that screen because they were going to need that information on a later screen. There were all these things that actually weren't speeding them up. And still, the design process had been what was considered a good design process until recently. And the only way, really, we could have discovered that our assumptions were all wrong would be to actually put something in front of users, watch them use it, and then change our ideas as we went, instead of completely developing a system that it turned out was not the right way to speed them up.
Yeah, I think that's a great story and a great example. And I've seen that a few times. And one of the things I did at my last company when we started building mobile apps at that company, we were kind of the first group to do that. And we rolled out our first one, I think, in 2010. And we didn't know how people would use our apps. We had technicians that kind of were driving around in trucks, and we kind of wanted to track them so we knew where they were, so we could send them issues so they could go to the closest one. And we didn't know how they would use the mobile apps. And we started looking at our numbers after we rolled them out. We realized that they weren't really using them much at all, like the way we thought they would.
That's
so
good.
we put one of our senior developers in a van for a couple of days and just had them ride around and take notes and see what they're doing, ask them questions, figure out how they're using it, what they like better. And we came back with a totally different design. It was just really a UI change, but it made a world of difference in the usage and the performance of the product that we were putting out. And it's kind of one of those things where like, why did we do this to start with?
Yeah. I think that's a perfect example also. And when I think back, I've seen it so many times that features you put in production don't actually accomplish the thing that you intended them to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some key things that we need to do when we're going through a transformation? We've already talked about some of the pitfalls to avoid. What is like one of the first things we should do within that first 30 days of starting out something like this?
Finish something.
Finish something, yeah.
That's the way I see it. The two key elements of the transformation are a big vision, a very clear vision of where you want to go with the transformation, but a very small execution. I ask myself, what's the thing we could actually finish within a couple of days that will move towards that big vision? And the tendency that we have to fight is we have a big picture vision for where we want to go. And then we try to plan out that, how we're going to get there. And so we spend a long time planning and not actually executing. And the only way to overcome that is to keep asking yourself the question, what is it that we can do in a few days that is a finished result that moves towards what that big goal is, and to insist that you keep finding those things.
I think that's incredibly valuable because if you get stuck in planning, you're going to get into that paralysis by analysis where you're constantly trying to figure out, well, what's the best way to do stuff? And I like to tell my team, it's good enough for a reason. Let's get something done and let's show the results, and we can always go back and improve it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And it's more important to have a result than to have plans on paper, which don't really help anybody.
Exactly. Yeah. So one of those things where like we're 50% done with analysis. Well, what have you finished?
What have you done? Yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. So how can people find out more about your book, War and Peace in IT, and as well as your other books, Seat at the Table and The Art of Business Value?
So let me quickly explain what I was trying to do with each of those books.
Yeah.
It might give people a clue as to whether they'd be interested in reading them. So I started out with The Art of Business Value. I realized that people in IT were talking a lot about business value. They were saying, we have to decide which features to add or what systems to build based on business value. And, the following is a good thing to do because it'll deliver business value. And the term kept coming up. And I realized that people hadn't really thought through what they meant by business value. And in fact, that it's just not obvious, actually. Business value is one of those vague terms that requires some thought. So I wrote that book to explore the concept of business value and how it should affect how you do IT. If you correctly understood what business value means, how would it change the way that you practice IT? So that was the purpose of the first book. And as I was writing that book, I realized that there were interesting questions around what role a CIO plays or an IT leader in figuring out whether something is valuable to the business. And what I realized is that we have all of these new agile techniques and DevOps and the cloud and all these other things. And we think of those in terms of how they can speed up individual projects. We think of them as project related. And my question to myself was, yes, that's true, but how do those things, agility and DevOps and the cloud and so on, how does that change the way you lead an IT organization if you are a CIO or a senior IT leader? And so that's what the second book was about. It was called A Seat at the Table, IT Leadership in the Age of Agility. So how does leadership change now that we're agile? And that book led me to the third one, where in that second book, in A Seat at the Table, I was talking about how we can't keep this distinction between IT and the business. And, we really have to bring the two things together and consider IT as part of the business. And a lot of the people who read that book said, that's great, but somebody should tell the business that. It's very nice that we IT leaders think that. So that's what the third book is. That's what War and Peace really is intended to be, is that this is the book to look at it from the business point of view and to say, what does it look like from a business point of view if you bring IT and the rest of the business closer together? How does it change the way you compete, the way that you think about finance and financial models? How does it affect product design and innovation and all of those things? So War and Peace is really looking at the business impacts of the things I was talking about in the other books.
So why the title War and Peace?
I happen to have been reading, and I realized that there were these interesting similarities isn't the right word, but there were these interesting lessons in that book that applied to this question of digital transformation. And I don't want to give away the book, but you can read the story, or I think you have read the stories. But in War and Peace, you have in the background Napoleon and his wars in Russia going on. And some of the mistakes that Napoleon seems to have made were mistakes of not being agile enough, not being able to either respond quickly enough in a lean way to what was going on, or not being able to respond to disruption when the Russian army changed some of the rules on him. So I found that it was a very useful analogy to draw as I was talking about digital transformation.
Yeah, I thought that part, the analogies of the way you started the book too, just with the story there, and then the analogies along the way about Napoleon kind of being the role of a C-level in IT and how that would. I thought those were really well done.
Yeah, and it was kind of fun to think of it too.
Yeah,
it entertained me to think about Napoleon as a CEO.
Yeah. well, I really appreciate having you on, and I'm loving your book, and I'm kicking myself for not reading Seat at the Table a few months ago when I got it. I'm definitely it's next on my list for sure. I'm going on vacation in a few weeks, and it's going to be it's what I'm going to do on the plane.
Great. I hope you find it helpful.
All right. So how can people find these books and find out more about you?
Oh, they could find them on Amazon.com easily, and various other retail outlets.
All right. I'm going to link all those up in the show notes as well, so you can find that at geekleader.com/Mark Schwartz. And I appreciate having you on. It's a lot of fun.
I enjoyed it too. Thank you.
Hope you guys enjoyed that conversation with Mark Schwartz. And be sure to check out War and Peace and IT. You can find that at geekleader.com/Mark Schwartz. And there'll be links to it. You can get it on Amazon, get it on Audible. I listened to the audio version on Audible. It was fantastic. I have also purchased a couple of paperback copies that I've given out. I recommend, if you are going through some type of digital transformation, you feel like IT is not being involved as much as they should be. They're not. They're more requirements fillers and order takers versus, helping drive the business decisions. Go ahead and purchase a copy and give it to, the C-suite that needs it, that needs to read this stuff and needs to get this information out there. It's been a great read. It's been very helpful for me, and hopefully that's helpful for you guys as well. If you found value in this episode or any of the other episodes, please head over to iTunes and leave me a rating and review. It means a lot. That's the one place that I go to read these things. So even if you listen somewhere else, you can still Google a Geek Leader podcast, and Apple Podcast is one of the first things that show up, and go there and check it out. And I think on the Apple release, they talked about how iTunes is going to be dead, so call it Apple Podcasts going forward. But yeah, just go there. You can do it. You can leave a review, I think, through Chrome or somewhere on the website. So yeah, give that a shout out. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.